The darkness was a constant, impenetrable sheet for Cashew, the sweet-natured golden retriever who'd lost his sight far too young. It meant stumbles, confusion, and a world that smelled rich but felt treacherous. Then came Libby, a sleek, initially aloof calico cat. She arrived not as a helper, but as an irritant, a flash of movement and a suspicious scent in Cashew's terrifying blur. Their connection was forged not by human design, but by a sudden shared silence that settled over the house, an unspoken agreement to navigate the deep quiet together. Now, let's enter their world. If you're already enjoying this story, a quick like and share makes all the difference. Let us know in the comments where you're listening from today. The house. Once a comforting maze of familiar scents and floor textures for Cashew, became a constant obstacle course after the diagnosis of sudden acquired retinal degeneration syndrome, or SARDS. He was an active dog, used to chasing tennis balls and bounding through open fields. Overnight, that life ceased. The family tried everything, leash guiding, verbal cues, even laying down scented trails, but the Golden's distress was palpable. He spent his days curled in the same spot, head down, refusing to move unless absolutely necessary. The house was too big, too full of unseen furniture legs and door jambs. It was a silent world, but the silence was thick with Cashew's fear. Libby, in contrast, was a creature of precision and deliberate movement. She was 3 years old, accustomed to having her way, and viewing the dog with a mild, proprietary disdain. She stalked the edges of the rooms, an inaudible shadow. Initially, the dynamic was one of careful avoidance. Cashew would stumble near her, and she'd flatten her ears and hiss a soft, warning puff of air. The humans expected this tension. They worried about the cat's stress around the newly clumsy dog. But Libby was watching. She wasn't avoiding Cashew, she was learning his patterns of confusion. She noticed the slight head tilt he used when trying to locate a sound. She registered the specific thump when his large paw missed a step on the low rug. For weeks, she merely observed, a feline sentinel with an uncanny ability to map the house's acoustics and Cashew's resulting distress zones. Her shift was subtle, starting with proximity. She began sleeping closer to his resting spot, initially inches away, then eventually touching his flank. It wasn't affection. It was anchor. Cashew would startle, but the pressure of her small, warm body provided an immediate, tangible location in his world of darkness. It was a small rebellion against the endless, terrifying void. He started to lean into her, not just for warmth, but for definition. Libby became the first fixed point in his collapsing sensory universe, the subtle, purring compass in the silent house. The fear didn't vanish, but for the first time in months, Cashew would lift his head when he felt the familiar brush of soft fur, anticipating the next moment instead of dreading it. The early signs of their relationship were easy to miss. Gentle shifts in behavior the humans attributed to chance or coincidence. Libby would often sit directly in front of a doorway, forcing Cashew to stop short rather than letting him walk directly into the frame. She'd rub against the legs of a dining chair just as he approached, providing an auditory and tactile warning signal. These were isolated incidents, however, lacking the true intentionality that would later define their lives. Their relationship was still one of coexistence, not collaboration. The pivotal moment arrived during a brief, unexpected rain shower. A back door had been left slightly ajar, just enough to tempt a thirsty Golden. Cashew, following the scent of fresh air and damp earth, wandered out onto the small raised deck. He took 2 confident steps before his world abruptly ended. The edge of the deck was an open drop of several feet to the stone patio below, a drop Cashew had no way of sensing. He lifted his paw for a third step, his large body tilting forward into the empty space. There was no time for a human to intervene. The disaster was unfolding too quickly. Suddenly, a streak of calico fur launched itself across the deck. Libby didn't push or scratch. She executed a perfectly timed, forceful body slam into Cashew's large shoulder, knocking him sideways, away from the lethal drop. The dog yelped in surprise and stumbled back onto all four paws, his nose inches from the terrifying void. Libby, having delivered the impact, sat frozen for a moment, ears pinned flat, before letting out a sharp, uncharacteristic, and insistent meow. Not a warning hiss, but a directional sound. Cashew turned his head toward the noise. Libby meowed again, a quick chirp, and began walking slowly toward the safety of the open door. Cashew followed, tail tucked, but safe. The moment of avoidance had transitioned into the moment of dedication. From that moment on, the relationship shifted into a meticulous, deliberate partnership. Libby's guiding wasn't born of a trainer's regimen, but a deep, instinctive understanding of Cashew's specific needs. She became his shadow, but unlike a shadow, she had weight and sound. Her method was simple, but flawlessly executed. She used her body as a bumper and her soft, insistent meows as a sonar. When Cashew wanted to move, he would emit a low, inquiring whine. This was her cue. Libby would walk just ahead of him, her tail, often curled up high, acting as a secondary, moving tactile guide that he occasionally brushed with his nose. Her movements were unnaturally slow for a cat, almost a stately procession. She was meticulous about keeping his flank within inches of a wall or a piece of furniture he knew, giving him an invisible perimeter of safety in his otherwise unbounded darkness. If the path was clear, she would walk smoothly. If an obstacle lay ahead, a dropped towel, a forgotten slipper, or the dreaded corner of the coffee table, she would stop, allowing Cashew's nose to bump gently against her hindquarters. It was a clear, unambiguous signal: halt. Once Cashew stopped, Libby would then perform a subtle, short loop, creating a small clack of her claws on the hardwood floor or a slight rustle on the rug, before settling down on the safe side of the impediment. She'd meow once, a gentle, rising tone. And Cashew would understand. He'd adjust his trajectory by a small, learned angle, step past the hidden danger, and immediately find her waiting body again. Their morning routine was the most profound demonstration of their bond. Cashew needed to be guided to his food and water bowls, which were always kept in the same spot, but were still a journey through the treacherous kitchen. Libby would position herself directly in front of the dog's chest, wait for his nose to confirm her location, and then lead the procession. It was a slow, majestic, and entirely silent ballet. At the bowls, she wouldn't leave. She would wait until she heard the distinct slurping sound, and only then, satisfied that his basic needs were met, would she proceed to her own separate meal. The humans noticed that Libby would often leave a wide perimeter around Cashew's bowls, ensuring he had space and wasn't startled by her sudden presence. This wasn't just guidance. It was a profound, cross-species empathy. Libby had somehow internalized the sheer terror of Cashew's sudden blindness, and her every action was dedicated to alleviating that fear. She wasn't just showing him where to step, she was restoring his dignity of movement. She gave him back his agency within a world that had tried to steal it. Through the years, this silent conversation evolved into a sophisticated, trusted language understood only by the two of them. Her little tap-tap of a paw meant this way. The low, steady purr was the all-clear signal. She had mapped his fear and replaced it with a tactile, auditory blueprint of the home, transforming the silent house into a sanctuary built on four paws. Years passed in this quiet rhythm of coordinated movement, the bond between Cashew and Libby deepening from necessity into genuine affection. But their sanctuary was about to face its greatest challenge: the move. The family was relocating to a new home several hundred miles away, a place with a completely different layout, unfamiliar sounds, and most crucially, a large, confusing yard. For Cashew, this represented the ultimate undoing of the safety Libby had built for him. His map of the world was about to be wiped clean. The first week in the new house was chaos. Cashew regressed completely. He refused to move from his bed, shaking visibly whenever a new sound echoed in the unfamiliar acoustics. The new floor felt different, the air smelled strange, and the locations of his human family were unpredictable. Libby, too, was stressed by the move. She was forced to abandon her years of carefully honed sensory data and start over, mapping a new world while simultaneously managing her own anxiety and Cashew's mounting terror. The humans tried their best, keeping Cashew on a leash, guiding him by hand, but he was unresponsive, relying solely on his feline guide. Libby, however, did not panic. She understood the magnitude of the task. She started with the core essentials: food and water. The bowls were placed in the new designated spot, and Libby began the slow, painstaking process of leading Cashew the long, unfamiliar route. She had to use louder meows, more persistent body checks, and even occasional gentle nips to encourage him to move. It was a grueling, frustrating process, but she never gave up, day after day, establishing the first new path, one paw step at a time. Once the indoor map was established, the yard became the ultimate test. It was massive, with sudden slopes, flower beds, and a large wooden deck with treacherous steps. Cashew's absolute refusal to venture into the open space was a heartbreaking sight. For 2 days he stood frozen at the back door. Then Libby decided on a new tactic. Instead of guiding him, she began playing. She would dash short distances, creating clear, audible thud, thud, thud sounds as she ran, before stopping and letting out a playful, inviting trill. She turned the yard into a game of auditory chase. Cashew, drawn by the familiar, comforting sound of his friend and the novelty of the noise, took a tentative step. Libby dashed 10 feet and stopped. Cashew lumbered after her, focusing completely on the sound. The dog wasn't seeing the yard, he was following the cat's sonic outline of it. She led him on a precise, winding path that avoided the major obstacles. She stopped right before the deck steps, let him bump her, and then meticulously navigated the path down, each tap of her claws marking the edge of a step. Cashew, trusting her implicit map, followed. For the first time in the new environment, Cashew's tail gave a small, tentative wag. The proving ground had become a testament to their unbreakable, dedicated, and beautiful partnership. She didn't just show him the way, she convinced him the way was safe. After establishing their footing in the new home, the years settled into a profound, almost mythic comfort. Their story became a quiet legend among the neighbors and the family's friends. They were Cashew and Libby, the inseparable duo, the dog who saw with his heart and the cat who guided with her body. But even the deepest bonds must contend with the passage of time. Cashew was growing old. His fur was laced with silver, his steps were slower, and the low, inquiring whine that summoned Libby became weaker, more effortful. The emotional crest of their story arrived one cool autumn evening. Cashew, having recently suffered a brief illness that left him profoundly weak, was attempting to navigate the short distance from his bed to the cool tile floor of the kitchen. He stopped halfway, confused and distressed, letting out a soft, almost imperceptible whimper. Libby was across the room, bathing herself, but she registered the sound instantly. She stopped grooming mid-lick, her focus absolute. She trotted over, her movements now slower too, matching his failing pace. She pressed her entire body against his flank, a long, sustained pressure that spoke of complete reassurance. Cashew leaned into her, his large frame momentarily supported by her small body. He was too tired to try and follow her usual leading meow. Understanding his exhaustion, Libby did something she rarely did. She settled down and waited, simply providing contact. She waited for 10 long minutes. Then Cashew stirred. He managed to lift his head, his nose searching the darkness until he found her. Libby began to purr, a deep, resonating rumble that Cashew could feel more than hear. This sound wasn't guidance. It was unconditional acceptance. It was the audible manifestation of their entire relationship, a sound that said, "I am here and you are safe." Cashew finally managed to push himself to his feet, relying on the anchor of her purr. Libby then led the final, short segment of the journey. She walked beside him, not in front, her hip constantly brushing his. It was a joint, laborious effort, but they reached the kitchen tile together. This was the apex of their symbiotic relationship, not a dramatic save from a cliff, but the quiet, dignified act of refusing to let the other face their final battles alone. It was the moment their necessity transformed into pure, unwavering devotion. The passing of Cashew was, for the family, a profound sorrow. For Libby, it was the cessation of a 7-year mission. For days after he was gone, she walked the familiar routes of the house, stopping at the exact spots where Cashew used to hesitate. She circled the empty dog bed, sniffing the familiar scent that still clung to the fabric. She waited by the food bowls, anticipating the low, demanding whine that would never come again. Her guiding ritual, so central to her identity, had been rendered suddenly obsolete. But the true resonance of their story lay not in the sadness of loss, but in the enduring, quiet change they imprinted on the world, a testament to what devotion looks like when stripped down to its most fundamental need. Libby stopped being Cashew's eyes, but she never stopped being a guardian. She began to treat the younger, sighted pets in the house differently, displaying an uncanny, gentle patience with their clumsy movements. She would still nudge them away from sharp corners, and she continued to provide that profound, anchoring presence, sleeping in spots that maximized her ability to be touched and heard by others. Their relationship became a permanent whispered lesson in the house. A constant reminder that the greatest acts of service are often those performed without expectation of reward, simply because the need exists. For Cashew, Libby was not merely a guide. She was the architect of his renewed existence, the tiny, purring engine that rebuilt his world after darkness took it. She taught him that vulnerability does not equate to helplessness. For Libby, Cashew gave her purpose, elevating her from a solitary house cat to a selfless, focused sentinel whose dedication transcended the artificial boundaries of species. Their quiet, 7-year journey on the floorboards, marked by meows and careful steps, proved that true empathy requires no shared language, only a shared commitment to mitigating the suffering of another. The cat and the blind dog, the unlikely pair, left behind a legacy defined by perfect, symbiotic trust. They showed the world that sometimes the surest path is the one lit only by the gentle persistence of a faithful heart. The stories we tell often focus on grand battles or epic journeys, but the most profound truths reside in the quiet commitment of two souls navigating a shared difficulty. Cashew and Libby's arc was not a heroic conquest over fate, but a gentle, sustained rebellion against loneliness. A beautiful demonstration that where sight fails, connection can build an entirely new world, founded on the perfect clarity of absolute trust. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story moved you, please consider liking and subscribing. It truly helps us bring more stories like this to light. We have a question for you. What was the single moment in this story that resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one, every.